this may just be the strangest gamepad I've ever seen for the Nintendo Switch, or for anything else for that matter. Let's go ahead and take a look. Hello and welcome to Retro Breeze. Please don't ask me what this is because I honestly have no idea. It seems to be a cross between a Nintendo Switch gamepad, the Sega Saturn 3D analog pad, and a couple of those knockoff Power Ranger toys you get from the 99p shop. Seriously, this thing is just completely bizarre, and I just could not resist picking it up during some cursed, foggy-headed late-night AliExpress binge. And so here it is. It's called the Ipega HillBilly Cat. Yes, HillBilly Cat. And this certainly isn't my first rodeo with Ipega. Way back in the day, I actually unboxed and reviewed one of their Android gamepads, the Dual Thorn, right here on this channel. And I really wasn't impressed with that, so I wonder how the HillBilly Cat is going to stand up. Now this gamepad actually comes packaged pretty nicely in a high quality box, including a holographic Ipega sticker which I quite like. They lean hard on the Nintendo Switch aspect of this controller, and it does work with the Switch, but not only that, it actually has a fold-out section that you can mount your Nintendo Switch on top of. But we're going to take a look at that a little bit later on. I'm not exactly sure what the 2-in-1 here means. I think it means that you can use it with a regular Switch and a Switch Lite, but hey, who knows. Inside the box here, you'll find the mental Starship Enterprise looking controller itself, along with a USB cable and an instruction manual. Anyway, here's the Ipega HillBilly Cat itself, and this really does seem to borrow a lot of DNA from the Sega Saturn 3D pad. The shape, at least according to my memory, because I don't have one of those anymore, is pretty much perfect actually. The size seems to be exactly the same size as that old Saturn pad. And the other thing I noticed is that the L2 and R2 triggers seem to be in the exact same place I remember them on the Saturn pad too, just on the back here. Now of course this is a very different gamepad than this. First of all, we have dual analog sticks. Massive ones, if you couldn't tell. These are huge. We also get a similarly massive D-pad. Seriously, look at the size of this thing. This might just be the biggest D-pad I've ever seen on anything. And then you'll find 6 face buttons, including an L and an R button. And this is kind of in an arcade-like format, and we're going to return to that thought a little bit later on. There's also a giant home button in the top here, and the red flap with the Ipega branding actually flips up. And in one word, this is flimsy. I'll let you decide a little bit later on if you want to put your Nintendo Switch in here or not. But yeah, this flips up and it has a little recess for the Switch to sit in. Now if we take a look around the back, things get a little bit more interesting. You have your L2 and R2 on here, as well as this ball, which is kind of strange, and these rubber pads. Now, isn't it weird to have these flat rubber pads on the back of the gamepad? Well, those are actually here because we're going to be setting this down on a surface to play with later on. And you're going to see that actually, whereas this Ipega controller is very strange, there's actually some really interesting ideas here. But for now, let's see how the buttons and analog sticks feel. Now, like I said, the sticks are absolutely massive. There's no two ways about it. These are easily the hugest sticks, at least the caps, that I've ever used. And they feel incredibly light. I'm talking super duper cheap. And they're so light that if you pull them all the way in one direction and let go, they'll actually spring back all the way over to the opposite direction before returning to center. Well, maybe not all the way, but definitely enough to register an input. The caps on top are grippy and rubbery and fine. But yeah, cheap seems to be the name of the game with these analog sticks. Now you can actually remove these rubber caps. And on the right stick, you'll just get a weird light plasticky surface instead of the cap. But on the left stick, you're going to get something much more interesting. And that's this weird little screw here. And we're going to return to look at this a little bit later on. By the way, these do click down for L3 and R3 as well. Anyway, moving on to the D-pad, this uses a rubber membrane connection. And it's actually not too bad. And I really like the large size of this D-pad, but it has so much room to move around within the shell that it just tends to kind of do that. And the pivot seems a little bit off balance. For example, it seems to press down a lot in the up direction and just not quite as much in the down direction. That said, the down direction has more of a satisfying thunk, and the up is a little looser. Left and right feel substantially better than up or down, so yeah, this is just... I don't know, I'm not going to say it's a good D-pad, it's just kind of weird. But to be honest, this is nowhere near the worst D-pad I've ever felt, at least on first impression. And it stays up well above the case when you're using it, rather than pressing down inside or going flush. Then we have these face buttons here. These are in an arcade stick-like layout, and they feel, well, actually really good. They have a very, very subtle texture to them, even though they kind of look closer to glossy. But they're nice and big, and they have a really, really nice snappy thunk. That means when you press them down, they feel really satisfying. They do move around quite a lot in the shell. Again, the cutout seems to be just a bit too big for each button. But overall, I mean, these are not bad at all, actually. All the other buttons on the face are pretty standard, and feel pretty much the same way, except for the home button, which is recessed into the case. Now there is actually an L1 and an R1 button on here, which is quite strange because there's already an L and an R on the front. And yes, these are hooked up to the same input. So this L and R button on the face is the exact same as this L1 and R1 on the top. And these are terrible, actually. These use a clicky dome switch connection, so they're very, very loud and snappy. But the shape of them is just not very good. They just feel a little bit too shallow and a little bit too hard to press. And I don't think they stick up enough from the case to make them discernible from the rest of it. And clicking down on these buttons highlights one of the other problems of the HillBilly Cat. It is just incredibly cheap in its construction. And when you click down on these buttons, it's kind of a resonant click. You can kind of feel it through the whole controller. And in fact, now that I think about it, I think you could extend that thought to every button on this controller. Whenever you push a button, you can kind of feel it all throughout the controller. It's just really, really cheap. But I mean, it was really cheap. Did I mention this was like £11 shipped from AliExpress? Ipega are like the super cheap controller maker, although they do have some pretty good products as well. And they've clearly got an absolute nut job on their team too, and I always appreciate that. And the last two buttons on here are L2 and R2 on the back here. And these are not analog, they're just membrane, and they're super mushy, and they kind of shake around in the case, and they're just not very nice at all. However, they are comfortable to hold your fingers on. So let's jump into a game here and see what the HillBilly Cat is really all about. And so here I am playing the excellent indie game, which you can pick up for $1, Tori 3D. And yeah, the Ipega seems to be working out really well. However, it wasn't immediately obvious how to connect this thing to the Switch, so I had to check out the instruction manual first. And wait, what's Elvis? Is this the Ipega Elvis, or is this the Ipega HillBilly Cat? I'm going to go with the latter, that sounds much more interesting to me. Anyway, the instruction manual is insanely detailed, and it looks like a lot of work went into this. How many people did they think were going to buy this thing, really? Is there a market for this that I'm not aware of? Anyway, there's a few different modes built into the Elvis that let you connect it to different devices, but I was able to get it connected to my Switch easily enough. And in general, I have no issues here. The controls are responsive, they feel pretty good, the analog sticks are very light and cheap feeling, but I mean, they work absolutely fine. So let me put up this flap here and we'll see what it's like in the flap. And let me just contextualize this for you. This controller is just over $10. The plastic flap is around 1 millimeter thick in terms of plastic. And my Switch OLED is worth about $300. Now, just to add on to that, I may have done a procedure or two that has boosted the value of my Nintendo Switch by probably double or so. So there's a lot of money on the table here, or should I say on this flap. And there is no way in the universe I would trust this flap with my Nintendo Switch in it. No way at all. At least that's what I thought until I realized that you're only really supposed to use the flap. And when you use it like that and there's no risk of the Switch falling out, yeah, actually I can see where this design idea came from. Because without the risk of dropping it, it works kind of fine, and it's just like having a kickstand built into your controller. If anything, it reminds me of those old controllers for Android phones that you used to hook your phone into. See, as a standard controller, this works out pretty well. But what about that weird screw and the ball on the back? Well, that's where the real magic happens. So you can unscrew this ball from the back of the controller, and then screw it onto the left analog stick. I don't need to tell you what this is. This is supposed to be like an arcade gamepad. So you can convert it from something resembling a regular gamepad into something vaguely resembling an arcade machine, or at least an arcade stick. Now bear in mind that at its core, this quote-unquote arcade stick is still that very cheap, light-feeling analog stick. So you're not going to get any of that clicky satisfaction that an arcade stick would get you. But you know what? This is actually not too bad. I can see the design concept here and why it would work. And you might notice in this video how I'm just kind of flicking the right stick with my finger to turn the camera, and that just happened automatically. It was really, really intuitive to do so. And to be perfectly honest, I think that this concept, at least the concept if not the execution, deserves some praise. Firstly, because I've never seen anything like it in my life. Secondly, because I think that the idea of turning a regular gamepad into an arcade stick is actually pretty innovative. And thirdly, because I think there's a genuine use case for this especially if somebody has a disability and they're unable to hold a full controller or use a small analog stick. I just kind of feel like you get the best of both worlds. Well, let me rephrase that, not the best of both worlds. I feel like it basically allows you to interact with your console in a couple of different ways. And it works pretty well for that. And if you're not playing a hardcore fighting arcade game, say you're playing something like Puzzle Bobble here, it works pretty great and it feels surprisingly genuine as a weird little mini controller arcade stick. Now when it comes to fighting games, especially the old school type, where you're going to be rotating the stick or the D-pad to pull off combos, it works fairly well, and I think the reason for that is that the sticks are so big that it's really easy to hit the correct directions. Now I don't think you're going to be competitive on this by any means, but what I'm saying is the weirdness of this controller doesn't hold it back from working just pretty well overall. And even the D-pad surprised me, as I seem to be able to hit all the right inputs with no issues whatsoever. Now I know this Neo Geo Pocket game isn't the best example of a fighting game, but hey, I still feel like I was able to play this game relatively well. Or so I thought. And even when it came to more modern games like Super Smash Bros., it only took a little adjustment to the positions of the buttons for me to really start to play fairly well. Or as well as I usually do, which is not very well at all. But what I'm saying is that the HillBilly Cat's weirdness and its weird arcade stick configuration doesn't prevent it from being just an okay controller overall. And I know that sounds like a weird compliment, but I was seriously expecting the worst here, and this definitely isn't the worst. And I think it's worth reiterating that for some people this might be the controller they've been looking for, particularly if they struggle to hold a controller up or they want something closer to an arcade stick without sacrificing the regular controller experience too. So anyway, I wanted to check a few things here just so you can see what this controller has to offer. Firstly, using the calibration tool with the Nintendo Switch, you can see that these sticks are very accurate, they're very sensitive and they work really well. I had no issues moving the dot here to exactly where I wanted it to be. There's no dead zone, there's no weird missing areas or no snapping to cardinal points. It just works really well. And by the way, the snapping you see on screen is actually in the Nintendo Switch tool, not the analog stick. And the right stick and all of the face buttons are the same too. Everything just works pretty well. There's no bad surprises here whatsoever. And let's go a little bit further than that, because here, I'm using tilt controls. That's right, there's actually an onboard gyroscope too. And again, after a little bit of adjustment to the weird shape of the controller and using tilt controls again after so long, I was actually able to play Mario Kart pretty well here. And in fact, despite what it looks like, I didn't feel like a shy guy at all in this race. I felt like a confident guy. And the gyroscope just felt very accurate and I was able to win the race. And here I am playing Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. And despite this just not being my game at all, the gyroscope worked absolutely great for all the aiming and everything I needed to do here. Just look at me throw this stick. Now that's innovation. Now there's one more thing I'll show off with the Ipega HillBilly Cat here, and that is that it does also work with PCs, namely the Steam Deck, and also Android devices such as your phone or an Odin or something like that. And once again, there are no surprises here, everything just works fine exactly how you'd expect. Anyway, because I feel like the longer this video goes on, the more my reputation is going down the sink, I'll wrap it up with my likes, dislikes, and my final opinion on the Ipega HillBilly Cat. First of all, what do I like? I like that it's just weird. It's just completely different from anything else I've ever seen, and that honestly can't be understated. It's just completely bizarre, and I always appreciate stuff like that. I like that despite all of that weirdness, there's some genuinely good ideas here, such as the screw-on arcade stick attachment, the flip-up lid, at least when you have the Switch down on the table and you're not holding it and it feels like it's gonna fall off, and that you have everything you need to play games regularly, like with a normal controller, and in a more arcade style. I just think there is genuinely some good ideas here. I like that the instruction manual is incredibly detailed and tells you everything that you need to know. And of course I like that it's cross-platform. It works with the Switch, it works with Android, it works with the Steam Deck, and there's no surprises either way. Oh, and weirdly enough, it also works with the PlayStation 3 for some reason, at least according to the manual. Next is that the gyroscope actually works really well, and that was a real surprise for me. And finally, it's cheap. That's right, it's like $10 shipped, or maybe $12, something like that. It's low price, it's readily available, and there are multiple colors to choose from. That's great. And now on to my dislikes. And of course the first one is the same as my previous like. It's cheap. I mean, this thing is dirt cheap, everything about it. From the hollow sounding plastic to the weird vibrations and resonance you get through the controller. Literally everything about this is bottom of the barrel cheap. But again, that comes at an extremely low cost to you, so I'm not really sure if it's that bad. As an extension, the analog sticks and the way that they flick back further than center when you let them go. This could potentially cause some issues during some games, or it could help you in others, but either way, again, it's just an extension of that cheapness. Next is L1 and R1 on the shoulders. These are terrible buttons, they barely work, and I don't think they were ever supposed to work. In fact, I kind of feel like they just stuck them there for good measure. And I don't know why these two inputs specifically are completely different and so much worse than all the others, which are actually pretty okay. And again, an extension of the cheapness is the flimsy flap on the top. I understand that you're not supposed to move this around while the flap is open and your switch is in it, but even so, I mean, this is super precarious. And I feel like it's an accident waiting to happen, especially if, say, it's a child using it and they're not exactly sure how to. They're going to drop the switch, guaranteed. Next is something I didn't cover elsewhere in the video, and that is the red LED while it's charging. It is super, super bright and it blinks, and it's just really, really distracting. And honestly, that about covers it, to be honest. And so what do I think overall about the Ipega HillBilly Cat /Elvis controller? And overall, I have to say, at the risk of my entire reputation, that I really, really like it actually. It's dirt cheap in both its cost and its construction, but everything works fairly well. As a regular gamepad, it's fine. As a more arcade stick-like gamepad, it's fine. I think there are plenty of good ideas here, and I think it just suffers from Ipega's usual ultra budget quality. But hey, I love things that are different. I love things that just try something new, that don't just try and follow the crowd. And when was the last time I walked into a video game store here and saw anything other than an Xbox style controller? Like, never. And so I really appreciate this. Should you buy it? Well, I don't know. I'm gonna leave that one up to you. If you do want to, I'll leave a link to it down in the description box below. It's not an affiliate or anything, so just have at it. Let me know what you think about this controller and whether you know any other totally mental controllers like this. Honestly, I love this stuff, so send them my way for sure. This has been Shem from Retro Breeze, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.